Well, welcome back, everybody. My name is Tom Campbell. I'm Stella Nova Coaching CEO, and this is the Leading Through Growth podcast, where we explore how leaders navigate the intersection of purpose, progress, and people. Today, I'm thrilled, really thrilled to be joined by Stephen Deason, CEO and founder of OPARasa. It's a groundbreaking social enterprise that helps individuals in long-term recovery rebuild their lives through meaningful employment and career development. Stephen's leadership journey is anything but traditional, although it started traditional, from a business executive to a recovery advocate. He's created a model that merges personal transformation with professional reintegration. We're going to talk about building culture in deeply human-centered organizations, leading through growth and challenge, and what it means to create real opportunity where it matters most. So let's just go ahead and dive in. Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time to join today's podcast and to share your story.
Colin, thank you so much for having me on this morning.
Can you give us a quick overview of OPARasa and what it does?
Yeah, we are as you mentioned, we're kind of a mission-driven social enterprise organization. Those words have become a little bit politically laden recently, so we just try to say we serve people who have struggled a little bit. One of the things that I was inspired to do some years back is that I realized there are a lot of people in the recovery community, and we can talk about process addictions, or we can talk about chemical addictions, et cetera. But there are a lot of people in the recovery community recovering from trauma, et cetera, who just kind of don't know what to do next. And so and there's a whole story around that. But what we wanted to do was begin to build businesses that are what I call recovery aware, right? So we understand that people may not have the background that other folks do have, and we try to work with them to provide some of the resources and tools they may not have picked up earlier on in their life. We do a lot of healthcare. So one of the things we get the question of is, do you put drug addicts in charge of grandma's medication? And so I want to address that right up front. No, we do not. We keep folks in our offices, and we work with them to try to train them in basic office and business skills so that they can go out and have a really fulfilling journey in the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about recovery aware,
Mm-hmm.
it's a really interesting phrase. How does that translate to how you lead or supervise the people in your business?
I think what did Henry Ford say? I hired a pair of hands and the head and the heart showed up. And so I needed to learn to manage the person as well as the hands. I think any good business does a good job at seeing people kind of for where they are,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding sort of what they need on an individual level. We just sort of take that one step further by normalizing the idea that most of us are in recovery from something. And so we
Mm-hmm.
try to get everybody in the office to relate to, whether it's recovery from divorce, it's recovery from childhood trauma, it's recovery
That's
from
interesting.
war.
Yeah.
We try to relate that and say, like, listen, we're all kind of in the same boat. We're all human. We've all struggled.
Right.
And so we take that and then we say, because these people are in recovery from, say, alcohol or chemical addiction or shopping or food, they might need to leave the office, and instead of going to lunch with you guys, they might need to be able to go to a 12-step meeting or
Mm.
a celebrate recovery meeting and come back and be able to and be able to share that, not hide it, right?
Right.
Our secrets keep us sick. And so what we're trying to do is eliminate the stigma that says being in recovery is a bad thing. Being in recovery is a great thing.
Right. No, our secrets make us sick. That's interesting. So before founding OPARasa, you were a business and strategy consulting expert. What was it like, the transformation, the from a traditional business environment to leading a purpose-driven, mission-based social enterprise?
Well, I think that so we need to go through an intermediary step there, right? So I went. I went and spent almost a decade at Emory doing master's degrees, PhD, et cetera, right? In that inner space. And it
Mm-hmm.
was so nice kind of getting away. A lot of our corporate world is involved in image protection, and rightfully so. I think we kind of underline it, but images matter a lot, reputation matters a lot,
Right.
words matter a lot. Words are symbols, and we know symbols matter. Being able to kind of exit that and go spend some time in academia, kind of reset my head around the idea of how important it is to sort of take people and educate them, especially in a world-class business school. Because when you're in a world-class business school, one of the things that happens is you see people from a creative, from a marketing background, sitting next to somebody with a master's degree in electrical engineering, and they're
Right.
both trying to figure out discounted cash flow analysis. And you have to bring them along, right? You've got to kind of get them to the same place. One of them's really good at math, but maybe not really good at figuring out what color blue is the right color to instigate buying behavior. And you have to kind of get those folks in these complex environments with really different skill sets to work well together and understand where each other's strengths are. And I think that really led to really helped inform and lead to some of the work that I've been doing, which is we all have, just humans in general, we all have these amazing gifts. Are we recognizing those gifts, and are we
Mm-hmm.
using them? And that's a question just put forth this morning with the team, right? Do you
Yeah.
know what your gifts are? Are you aware of them? If not, how can we help you be aware of those, and how can we help you use them?
What strikes me about this is that what you're saying is important, and maybe you learned it in at Emory. Maybe you inferred it in interactions with people in recovery over time. But what you're saying is working with people that they're the hands, the head, and the heart. They are. You need to build those relationships. You need to do those things. That sounds, and there may be people listening who say, "Oh, well, yeah, that makes sense for a nonprofit. That makes sense for a mission-driven organization." But it strikes me, and in my conversations with lots of leaders, it strikes me that that's really essential, even for traditional business.
I believe it is. I think one of the things we're working on, and something you and I had discussed kind of in an offline conversation, was this idea of a process-driven organization. Did
Mm-hmm.
you dive on that for a second?
Yeah.
Uh, I'm a big believer in process. Everything needs to be turned into a process, because a process, in some sense, is your shield. Hey, I'm following the process. Am I doing my job? And most of us want to know that we're doing a good job.
Mm-hmm.
Most people. The other thing that a process does is it takes out the emotional aspect of managing the human's behaviors. So, are you following the process is a question. If yes, then I know that your work is leading to an output. Is the output good? Well, if it's
Mm-hmm.
not, I need to change the process, not the person. What that allows me to do is separate out the behaviors the business needs to be successful, the hands, from the heart
Right.
and the head. And then I can spend more time thinking about how do I motivate the head and get the heart involved in a way that's meaningful to that person. Then I get longevity in employment relationship. I get somebody who is motivated to work. And we want to do that by trying to align our personal, professional, and our financial goals
Mm-hmm.
with the process and the business. So the KPIs, we need to show people over and over again how them showing up and following this process and doing it with the best effort they can and a good attitude and a positive mental affect, right? How all of those things lead to the outcomes in the world that they want to achieve.
Right. It sounds like you're merging, maybe not merging, but considering on separate tracks the transactional and the relational.
Doing our best to do that, right?
Yeah.
The fact is that transactional relationships often. So my doctoral work is in accounting, and if you look at the underpinnings, accounting is really about trust. Accounting is about developing trust that a contract is going to be performed as it's written, trust that the other party, who you may not know all that well, is going to execute to a
Hmm.
set of standards that you put in place, et cetera. And so when I look at a business, what I think about is there are a lot of transactions that occur inside the business on a day-to-day basis. You need to borrow a pen from somebody, they hand it to you later, they think they've earned a reciprocity to ask you for a paper clip. I'm just being kind of silly for the
Right,
sake,
right, right,
sake of the effect, right? But in those transactions, there's this development of this trust and reciprocity, right?
right.
That starts to happen. And so this deeper relationship begins to develop. Well, if I can trust you to give me a pen or a piece of paper or, one of the mints off your desk, maybe I can trust you with a little bit more personal information. And so these relationships start to deepen beyond the transactional level. And then the transactions start to have less friction.
Right.
To continue with the kind of silly example we're using, you know, you don't hear things like, well, they took 3 sheets of paper off my desk, and nobody's offended by that, because if you and I are friends and you walk in and you're like, hey, Stephen, I need to borrow $10 or I need to borrow a sheet of paper, I'm just going to hand it to you.
Right.
Right. I trust that in some way you will reciprocate down the road in some way that's meaningful to you and to
Right.
me. Um,
Right.
and so we want to look at both, but I think in business it often starts with, you get dropped in a new office somewhere. Maybe you're a new CEO. Nobody knows you. They certainly
Right.
don't know you yet,
Not at
right?
all.
They
Right.
they in fact they're probably terrified because people don't enjoy. We say people don't like change. People are scared of change.
Hmm.
It means uncertainty, and people don't like uncertainty. And so the question is, how do we get small transactions quickly so that trust begins to build, so that I can show reciprocity, so that I can demonstrate that I'm a relatively altruistic human being in a way that makes you, and I hate to sound this clinical about it, but that makes you want to reciprocate back, because what I want to do is build a relationship where we are mutually seeking the same goals.
Right. And the reciprocal nature is really reciprocating trust. So the more one person trusts another person, even a little bit, it just builds on the trust. And I imagine in a recovery or in a setting where there's a lot of people in personal recovery, but also in professional development, where it's usually, or it can often not be collegial, but more competitive. That can be a real challenge in in an environment where you're navigating both of those dynamics.
One of the things that, when I go back to my old kind of corporate career, one of the things that always bothered me about the way bigger corporations operate is that there seems to be a lot of nitpicking and a lot of undermining of sort of peers or other people that are kind of trying to get promoted to the same level.
Right.
A lot of that doesn't show up in the recovery community. And the reason that it doesn't, I think a big part of the reason that it doesn't is that in the recovery community, everybody's focused kind of on a singular goal. Can I stay sober? So everybody has this deep intrinsic self motivation. And what you have to convince them of when they're early on is the way I stay sober is by giving away what I've learned to someone else for free.
Mm.
What if we built a company around the principle, which by the way, they're all biblical, right? This all comes out of James.
Sure.
But what if we built a company around the principles of recovery, honesty, openness, willingness, jumping in to help other people when they need it, and there's a constant path for everyone to kind of continue to progress until you kind of get into that tournament that happens at the very tip top of an organization. Haven't solved that one yet, but but if, and I don't know that I ever will. I'm not sure there's a solution to that because it's a winner take all tournament at the top. But
Right.
the key thing is, can we set a path for everyone and then get everyone to mutually say, hey, we all get better when each of us gets better.
I think that's wonderful, and I think there's so much that traditional business, I use that term um, loosely, can learn and is learning from the world of uh, recovery, but also disability, culture and that kind of thing. It's in the disability world, and I worked a long time with disability programs on the federal level. It's called the curb cut effect. Curb cuts in on sidewalks were really designed initially for people who use wheelchairs, but studies show now that curb cuts are used by 80% of people regardless of their situation. They're used by old people who can't step up on a curb easily. They're used by people who are dragging suitcases or pushing baby strollers, or that kind of thing. And so something that was done for the primary purpose of somebody in a wheelchair is a benefit to everybody because the culture has changed.
What a delightful insight and a statistic. Yeah, exactly that. If we focus first on do we trust one another and can we continually trust one another, then what ends up happening, I think, in my experience, is fairly quickly is, we can make hard pivots and hard decisions.
Mm-hmm.
What's the latest HBR article I was reading the other day about emotional safety, right?
Absolutely.
People feel emotional safety is often confounded with like you can't fire me or we can't have hard discussions. That's not emotional safety at
No.
all. I would actually challenge you and say that's the opposite of emotional safety. In fact, people have a really good sense for when you're BSing them, and they know it, and they start to their level of distrust begins to increase. And
Right.
so what we do is we don't have any of that here. We call things for what they are when we see them, not in a pejorative way or a way that harms the individual, but that's about the behavior. And so what we've started to see fairly quickly in the last 5 years is our staff who stick with us we like the fact that you or other people in the company are willing to say, hey, this isn't right. You have to get this fixed in no uncertain terms, because we always know where we stand.
I think that's tremendous. And when you're talking about building that sense of trust, um, and you said you can people know when you're BSing them, you
Yep.
know, and everybody knows. I had a boss one time. She was the nicest person, apparently the nicest person, but something just seemed off to me. And what I discovered later was she was faking it. She really didn't want to be there. She was unhappy, and I was picking up on that inauthenticity, right?
Right.
So it seems to me that a lot of it is about authenticity. And if you're someone in recovery, showing up as someone in recovery, that's being authentic. If you have to fake it, if you have to hide that fact, that's going to take up a ton of energy that you are not going to have then to do the work of the business where you are.
Bingo. You put your finger right on it, and things that's the exact thing. I'm going to say this, and forgive me if any of you are people pleasers who are listening to this. Some of the most dangerous people, and that's some of the
No,
most
I get it.
some of the
I
most
get it.
dangerous people to lead a company are people who are people pleasers. And
If they're not self-aware, absolutely, I would agree.
I would say some of the most dangerous people to lead companies are drug addicts if they're not self-aware, right? Because
Yeah, yeah,
right. But when you're self-aware, you know that hole in your personality, and you're able to put processes and stop gaps in place to take care of it. A people pleaser in a leadership position will tell people what they want to hear, even while they're doing something else,
right, right.
right? And and I, and
Without realizing,
without no exactly, that's the
without realizing,
well, and by the way, a drug addict who's not in recovery is a really dangerous person because they often don't know they're a drug addict.
right.
So and there are other things I'm sure your listeners can think about of personality archetypes where you have to be self-aware.
Right. Well,
Where
I
where are my
that
holes?
that brings up a conversation we had last week when we were talking. you have to be aware of your style, of your approach, of your personality as a leader. And I think I read an HBR article years ago that talked about one of the consistent things among successful CEOs was a sense of self-awareness.
Right.
And you talked about your style, your natural style being authoritative or dictatorial, and you had to learn not to be that way. This seems like a good opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah, it's a great one. So, my undergraduate degree is in pure or theoretical mathematics, right? And in that world, um, uh, and I kind of naturally gravitated toward that, not because there's a right or a wrong answer, but because you understand the underlying first principles before you develop your answer, which
Right.
in math is really a philosophy, right? People often think math is a
Absolutely.
science. It's not, it's a philosophical approach.
But it's
Um,
funny, I'm gonna interrupt you. My daughter just graduated with a math degree,
yep,
and she we had this exact same conversation. She said math at some point, the more you study math, it turns into philosophy.
correct. Yeah, it's
Fascinating.
an amazing way of building models about the world. The problem with that framework, it's super helpful in some situations. The challenge, I say the challenge that I face with that framework is I often see an answer that is in my mind the right answer to the model that I've built about the situation. What I've had to do is adjust that to be helpful. What I've had to do over the years is become aware that sometimes I'm not seeing the same model everyone else is, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are different variables in my model from the model that, you know, uh, Karen or Mike or, you know, Dan or Kim or some of these other folks in my office, it's that they see a different model. And so what I've learned
Right.
to do is become very, what I call either coaching or professorial. I get really curious. What are you seeing that I'm not? Is
Mm.
not a very helpful question to ask directly, but that's how I think about it. What comes
Right.
out of my mouth is, tell me what you see.
Right.
Share with me what you're looking at, right?
I
And
I
often
love that.
it helps bulk my it helps me adjust my model so that I can see things through their lens. And then it helps me start to translate like where's because my goal should never be to get my model instituted. My goal should
Right.
be to get a useful model instituted that
Right.
leads to the outcome that's best for the company.
What that reminds me of is it sounds like what you're saying is that curiosity is like a superpower for a leader.
100%.
Because what's interesting to me is when I was training to be a coach, curiosity was like number one. You need to embody a sense of objective curiosity,
Yes.
not subjective and not judgmental curiosity, but objective curiosity. And the
I appreciate
difference
that language.
is, the difference is, you know, I genuinely want to know what's going on with you. I genuinely want to know what you're thinking and what you're seeing in this situation. That's fascinating.
And understand there are situations that still require, either a dictatorial or an authoritative approach, right? And I can list them all. Turnaround situations are great for that, et cetera. But those have become tools in my toolbox. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing, I read an article years ago. I don't remember where. I can't cite it. This is the academic ending. But in that article, they went around to 500 of the most successful people in the world, and they asked those folks, "What do you do that's different from every one of the people you knew coming up?"
Mm.
That and interestingly, two things seem to be highly common amongst all of them. One of those things is the highest level one is, and I don't remember, in the 60, 70 percentile range. They have a private what I would call a mindfulness or a meditation moment every day. They don't all do it at the same time, but almost every one of them has this moment where they just sit and breathe in some way. I do
That's great.
meditation. I do prayer and meditation. Other people do
Yeah.
other things, but that was a commonality. And the second one was they have a rigorous approach to how they start their day. They start their no matter whether they're on vacation or not. Um, they start their day at the same time every day, and they follow the same process. So I think
Yeah.
there's some sense of I wake up, I do the same thing, and then I take a moment to kind of connect with myself. And in that process, sort of I feel safe and stable.
Right.
And from that place, I can be authentic, I can be vulnerable, I can get really curious, right? In other words,
It's
I center
fascinating
myself. Yeah,
because if you're not safe, if you as the leader of an organization, a company, a team, whatever it is, if you as a leader are not feeling safe and stable, the team is not going to be safe and stable. The culture is not going to be safe and stable. You know, we all know executives who are fighting sense that they have to prove themselves because they aren't feeling safe and stable.
right.
And those people, those cultures are toxic usually.
They're really difficult to work in. I agree with that. One of the things I'm constantly reiterating with our team is my ego has no place here. My ego has no place in this business. And what I mean by that, and what I elaborate with them on is, you know, if I'm making an ego driven decision, it's going to be a
Mm.
bad. And
That's
what I mean by bad is it's not going to help you. It's not going to help the business,
right.
right?
Well,
It
and it's
might make me feel good.
right, but it's the whole concept that as an individual you can make whatever decisions you want to make. But when you're the leader of an organization, you become the organization is an extension of your personality in a lot of ways, especially the culture, unless you make it intentional to do it different, right?
Yes, correct.
So what is
At this
we've only
stage,
got a
I would challenge that and say that at this stage of development, that is true as an organization ages. Hopefully, it takes on its own DNA and becomes
yes,
its own
yeah.
personality.
And when I say organization, I mean it could be a division within a larger company. It's a smaller piece, right? I mean, obviously, when it gets bigger, you hope that there's a lot more um, checks and balances on the
Well,
leaders.
and to
Yeah,
your point, certainly the leader has an outsized influence, sometimes overwhelming on the personality and the DNA of the organization they're leading.
right,
And
right,
we have to be hyper conscious of that. That's one of my top things every day is, am I making decisions based on good business logic, based on good emotional logic, et cetera? Or am I making a
right.
decision because this morning I woke up and thought, you know what, I'd look better in a sports car.
Now that makes sense.
So we were
So
going to
there's
go.
there's a couple of minutes left. I want to respect your time and our anybody listening their time. What's on the horizon for you? What's on the horizon for OPARasa, for you, that you're excited about in the world of leadership and executive direction?
Well, I'm excited right now because we've launched a new division. Excuse me. And within that division, I'm starting to see the rise up of this kind of new leadership team, and they're sort of taking the reins. And one of the things, I've been encouraging for a while, but they just really took off and ran with is we've got this. So we're doing home care. We're a
Mm-hmm.
PHC, which is a private home care provider. We're licensed by the state of Georgia and North Georgia, and and the team came to me with uh, I'll say a business plan, right? For you and me, maybe given our backgrounds, it probably wasn't as baked as it could have been, but it was the start.
Yeah,
And it was this idea of, can we take this AI model and go into folks' home and provide family members with safety and security, and can we think it out? So it's just so exciting to watch younger people rise up and extend their capacity to understand what's needed to launch something in business, and then execute it. And so they've done
right.
that. We rolled it out this week. I'm just delighted with that. From my vantage point, really all that I want to do is kind of continue to expand what we've been able to do so far.
Right.
And say, hey, our model's a little different. A lot of people out there are worried about employment. We're less worried about that than we are personal development. Can
Right.
we can we take in somebody and over the course of 2 or 3 years turn them into somebody that can go out and really build a great life for themselves and their family? And we're seeing that result in the marketplace. People have left us and gone and done really, really well. And so those stories are starting to compound. And of course, we know, Einstein said the most powerful force in the universe was compound interest. And so that's what we're starting to see. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to see what that future holds.
Well, you have you have a wonderful model that has so much potential, so much power behind it. But I also, it's harder. This social enterprise approach is much harder than a traditional business. You've got a traditional business, you've got one bottom line, you've got a financial bottom line. If you're not bringing in more money than you're spending, you're going to go out of business. What I hear you saying is you've got two bottom lines. Obviously, you've got the financial bottom line. If you're not bringing in more money than you're spending, you're going to go out of business. But if you're not taking care of your people, if you're not doing that human personal development, that recovery support piece, also, now you're not doing what you need to be doing.
Let me touch on that topic. I am the jury's still out on whether the statement is exactly true. So I'm kind of a Milton Friedman devotee, and I understand his arguments about that and everything else, and I've been through them ad nauseum. And at the same time, if we don't pay attention to the human element, so long as we have human-driven businesses, we're missing out on opportunity to affect positively our bottom line.
I love that. I love that so much because what you're doing is saying it's not either or, it is both. It is both and.
It is my belief that it needs to be.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. I so much appreciate you being here. You've taken the time and sharing your vast experience and knowledge and wonderful concepts of where you're going with OPARasa. So huge thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity to get on with you, Tom. I appreciate it.
No, you're very welcome. And I love mainly what I love about what you have presented here is that it's really a powerful demonstration of what a purpose-driven leadership organization or purpose-driven leadership approach can look like. Reminding us that business is really a vehicle for dignity, healing, and community. And I love that. So thank you very much for being with us. And to anybody else, thank you for listening. Until next time, I'm Tom Campbell, and this is Leading Through Growth.